Little did the millionaire know that his encounter with a struggling family in the restaurant would have a life-altering impact on both of them. Unbeknownst to him, while he was engaged in his rude behavior, the family's mother discreetly made a subtle modification to his bill. This seemingly small act was about to completely upend his world. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video with your friends. From the moment this family stepped foot inside the elegant restaurant, it was evident that they felt a bit out of their element. The establishment exuded opulence while the family were dressed in modest attire, displaying a hint of nervousness as they took their seats. However, this evening held a special significance. It was their daughter's graduation celebration. Both parents were in agreement that she deserved an upscale experience to celebrate her achievement. As they perused the menu, an average family strolled into the restaurant and settled into the booth beside them. It didn't take long for them to take note of the unassuming family. The millionaire's family wasted no time in ridiculing the family, the dishes they chose to eat, and the simplicity of their attire, hurling plenty of cruel jokes their way. As the taunting continued, the millionaire's parents found themselves laughing along, while the rest of the family remained composed. Upon the obnoxious millionaire's return from the restroom, he discovered that the family had departed from the restaurant. Little did he know that a truly transformative event had transpired in his absence. As the couple returned to their booth, they noticed the waitress clearing it off, giving it a thorough wipe-down. Little did the millionaire know that the inquiry he was about to make would have a profound impact on his life. With a chuckle, the waitress approached their booth and emphatically placed the bill on the table with a resounding thud. With a deliberate motion, the waitress withdrew her hand from the check, focusing her gaze on the haughty millionaire and his parents. A sly smile crept across her face as she delivered unexpected news. "You needn't worry about the payment. The family at the next table has graciously settled your bill," she explained, gesturing toward a note that had been left behind with a message. The millionaire couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Those poor schmucks did what?" His gaze turned downwards and looked at the bill in front of him, and at that moment it was like lightning shooting through his heart. The note said the following: "Don't forget where you came from, Bernard Campbell." The man's face was first filled with anger. "Why do these people think they have the right to pay my bill? Like I'm not capable of paying my own dues. What gives them the right to belittle me like that in front of my parents?" But shortly after that initial emotion, the rage turned into confusion, because paying the bill was one thing, but it was the message on the note that really got him flustered. "Forget where I came from. I know who I am and where I come from." But these people seemed to know as well, because they knew that his name was Bernard. How could that be? That last name, though, that wasn't his. He looked up from the note and peered into his father's eyes. The old man looked at the note as well, and the message struck a chord of familiarity with him. "Do you know this last name, Father?" Bernard asked, and immediately after asking this, his father's face turned red. The old man got agitated and told Bernard not to ask him about this, but Bernard didn't listen. There was something about this name that his parents weren't telling him. Bernard got angry and demanded that they stop their weird, secretive behavior. His mother looked away, but Bernard turned her face and said, "Tell me now." His mother looked at him with a stale gaze. "All right. Maybe it is time you knew, whatever," she said, slightly annoyed. "We are not your biological parents. We adopted you right after you were born. Are you happy now?" But Bernard wasn't happy at all. His face puffed up and his eyes were filled with anger. "How could you just drop this major news on me like that? You have lied to me my entire life, and you act like you don't even care." Bernard was angry and hoped for an emotional response in return, but he unfortunately got the opposite. His adoptive parents reacted coldly and carelessly, as they did with most things. He never had a good relationship with his parents, but this took the cake. "I'm done with you, and I never want to see you two ever again," he shouted. He didn't expect, though, that his father would take this remark seriously. The old man made his son leave the restaurant and shouted that he would disinherit him. And unfortunately for the once cocky millionaire, that was exactly what happened. Bernard walked home from the restaurant because they drove over there in his father's Bentley. He never had a good relationship with his adoptive parents. Wealth and material things were the only things that connected their bond. But that was about to change. because when the emotional Bernard entered his home and checked his bank account, he saw that all of his assets were frozen. His father was true to his word and cut Bernard off from all family wealth, without a thought and with just a click of a button. Bernard could only sit there and cry. It didn't take long for his financial situation to deteriorate after that. He saw the numbers on his bank account dwindle in rapid fashion, and no matter how much he pleaded his parents to reinstate him, they did not listen. Eventually, they even blocked his number and changed the locks. The lack of funding and family made Bernard depressed. Bernard never worked a day in his life. All of his income was always freely given by his parents. He had no prior job experience or formal education, and that resulted in job rejection after job rejection. He had to trade in his house for a tiny studio in a bad neighborhood. This was officially rock bottom, and then the day came that would change his life forever. Bernard had only a few more dollars to his name and was now forced to visit a food bank. It was a hard contrast to the life he knew. The venue was almost completely opposite of the vibe of the restaurant where his life took a wrong turn. He entered the large warehouse full of soup cans and other produce with a baseball cap and a hoodie covering most of his face. He didn't feel comfortable there, so going as incognito as possible was his preferred option. But that didn't stop one particular person from shouting his name in the back of the line. Bernard felt like time stopped for a second. The former millionaire's face turned pale white in a matter of seconds as he turned around to see where the sound came from, and that's when he saw a short, happy, smiling woman about 15 feet behind him. She waved and looked oddly familiar to him. The woman walked over to Bernard and said, "Hey." Bernard took off his baseball hat and tried to think of something to say, but before he could, the woman already started talking. "Don't you remember? It's me from the restaurant. I paid your bill and wrote that message," she said, and that's when it hit him. As you might expect, Bernard didn't like this woman very much at first. His first reaction was one of anger. He pulled the woman out of the line and asked her how she knew his first name, and more importantly, how she knew the name of his biological parents, while he himself didn't even know. His face turned more red by the minute, and as he continued talking, it became clear that he blamed this woman for everything bad that had happened to him. "If I never saw that last name you wrote down, I would have never defied my parents. This is all your fault," Bernard shouted. "Because of that note, I lost everything I knew and loved, my house, my lifestyle. I have nothing left," Bernard said while tears filled his eyes. And the one thing he never understood was why she paid his bill in the first place. Her family seemed like they had to fight for every penny. The mysterious woman saw the anger, sadness, and confusion in Bernard's face. His once closed-off attitude was broken down, and in front of her now stood a frail man. The woman looked at Bernard with kind eyes and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch made Bernard jitter. He normally would have slapped a stranger's hand away, but something about this woman calmed him. It felt warm and familiar. The woman answered by saying, "Family sticks together, Bernard?" The man's eyes grew larger as she said those words, and the hairs on Bernard's neck instantly stood up straight. Bernard could feel the emotions building up inside his body. He had already cried in front of this woman, but he felt like he was about to break down. The woman continued by saying that she knew about his adoption from a young age. "But how? How do you know all of this about me?" Bernard asked. "Well, Bernard, the answer to that is quite simple," the woman said. "It's because I am your biological sister." The woman said that her name was Angela, but her loved ones called her Angie. She was adopted as well when their mother couldn't take care of them anymore. "By another family, of course," she said, smiling. "I'm saddened to hear that your family reacted so unforgiving after the adoption news dropped. My adoptive family didn't have much wealth, but my upbringing was filled with love and care. I knew about my adoption from a young age, but that never changed our love for one another. But one thing I found out later, a few months back I found out about your existence, Bernard," Angie said. "It was not something that my father and mother wanted to hide from me. No, not at all. It was just something that required the right maturity on my part to fully understand. But I knew I wanted to find you," Angie said. "And as if destiny heard my pleading calls, we met by pure chance at that restaurant." Angie said that she wasn't there to find him. She was really just celebrating their daughter's high school graduation. "But when I saw you come in, I recognized you instantly from the picture my mom gave me," Angie said. Bernard went quiet as a mouse after hearing his sister's story. He couldn't believe that after all these years of living a lie, he had found a piece of his past. The emotions that had built up in his body poured out in a sea of tears. Angie just smiled and asked if her brother was hungry. "Hungry?" Bernard asked while still sobering. "Yes, hungry. If it's okay with you, I would like to invite you for dinner at our place." Bernard couldn't believe it. He only experienced the cold resemblance of a family his entire life. How can Angela be this loving? It was quiet for a second, but soon after, Bernard accepted. When the new brother and sister arrived at Angie's house, they were met with open arms. Her husband and their children felt like a warm and comforting blanket for the confused and broken Bernard. He never knew this kind of family love, and the love didn't stop at a warm embrace. While eating dinner, Bernard explained his situation further, telling Angie's husband how he lost everything after his father disinherited him, how he struggled to pick up the pieces afterward, and how the future seemed bleak. It was painful to hear for his sister and her family. But that's when Angie came up with a great idea. Angie told her brother that she worked at a fast food chain in the city center. It wasn't much, but the hours were fine, and the colleagues felt like her second family. "We are still looking for new waiters, and I'm sure you will do perfectly. Let me help. Come with me tomorrow and work with us." To Bernard, it felt like the kindness of his newly discovered sister knew no boundaries. She was kind just for the sake of being kind. It was hard for Bernard to comprehend, but as he looked into her eyes, he knew it felt right. He smiled at her and happily accepted the offer. After dinner and a night of catching up, it was time for bed. For the first time in many nights, he was looking forward to the next day. And when they arrived, he and his sister walked into the fast food restaurant with big smiles. It was a simple place, no flashy lights, just fries, burgers, and working folk. And the promise Angie made of a warm second family was completely true. The new colleagues were great and made Bernard feel right at home. And after just a couple of weeks, Bernard was waiting tables like it was second nature. But then suddenly, a dark cloud approached the restaurant. Bernard was just waiting tables and whistling happily while he did it, when a shadow from his past strolled by the restaurant. His rich adoptive parents walked by the windows and saw their son working in the establishment. If they were kind, they would have just let him be, but they were not that kind of people. As they entered the fast food restaurant, Bernard spotted them almost instantly. They were looking around and acting smirky, even flipping over a boy's milkshake as they passed along. Bernard felt his heart beating in his chest. He wanted to hide, but his sister convinced him to keep his head held high. She even convinced him to wait at their table. "There is nothing to worry about, brother," she said with a kind voice. Bernard walked to their table and asked what they wanted to order, but his parents instantly started to mock him, calling him a lowlife and asking what he was doing in this dump. His mother started laughing at him in a high-pitched voice, but his father was the worst of the two. "I knew that without Mommy and Daddy holding your hand, you would resort to nothing. You are such a disappointment," the cruel old man said. Bernard could feel the anger build up inside of him. Bernard was about to explode. He didn't want to because he had turned over a new leaf. He was finally happy for once, but his father could always find a way to anger him. But right before he could blurt out a mean response, Angie stepped in. She pushed herself in front of her brother and the little 5.3-foot-tall woman formed a shield in front of her younger brother. She might not have been tall, but her confidence was imposing. Angie called the two wannabe parents mean and vile people and told them that Bernard was now with his new family, the family he chose, but Angie was not done yet. She grabbed their menus and placed them back on the pile with the rest. This is a place of peace and love, a place where true families come together, so that means that there is no place for people like you here. Angie told Bernard's parents to stand up and pointed them toward the door. The two old people didn't know what to say. Humiliated and sad, they exited the restaurant. Bernard couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. His sister showed him some family love and stood up to his lifelong bullies. He felt warm inside and hugged his newfound family member. This just felt right. And after a couple of months of hard work and bonding with his colleagues, Bernard could finally say that his life was on track again. He could comfortably rent a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in the city now. It was clean and close to his sister, which he liked. And their bond, well, that bond already felt immensely strong. They are still getting to know one another, of course. There are so many years to catch up on. But Bernard loves coming over to her house, learning about her and her family, and playing with his niece and nephew. The future just looked bright.